Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and once again, I'm joined with two great guests as we are going to look ahead at some Week 15 matchups and rankings. I'm joined with Zareh and David Zäch, and we are going to help you prep for your fantasy football playoffs. There's some guys right now that you might be a little concerned about starting. Tua Tagovailoa, Mike Evans, Gabe Davis, they've all been ice cold, and we're going to let you know what to do with them. We're going to look at some confusing backfields. Devin Singletary and James Cook, DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, Leonard Fournette, and Rachaad White. And we're going to help you decide how you should handle these backfields in some must-win matchups this week. Be sure to stick through to the very end because we cover a ton of topics and some very important games. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Launchpad. Can you start Tua Tagovailoa this week in your fantasy playoffs? That and so much more on today's episode of The Launchpad. Z, why don't you go ahead and start us off here? How are we feeling about Tua after back-to-back duds?
Not too great, Dave. I think the blueprint is out against the Dolphins offense right now, and it's really all about how they adjust and how Mike McDaniels adjusts as a head coach. We saw kind of Sean McVay go through this a few years ago when his Rams offense was figured out and he failed to adjust to it. Mike McDaniels is a young coach, and let's see how he adapts to it. So I don't feel too great about Tua this week. Also, they are going to play in some pretty harsh elements versus in a divisional matchup at Buffalo, very hostile environment. Overall sentiment, no, don't feel too great about it. Don't think there are too many good other streaming options above Tua. So if you're stuck with him, like Tua or Geno, like it's kind of like a toss-up. I think I'd rather go to Tua over Geno, but yeah, I don't feel great about it this week.
Yeah, and just for anybody that's unaware, you talked about how the blueprint was kind of laid out, and we saw, the San Francisco defense is a great defense, so a struggle there isn't a huge, something to pay attention to, just a little blip on the radar. But then when the Chargers came out with their completely banged up defense and followed that exact blueprint, and what it was just chipping Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill at the line of scrimmage, throwing them off their timing, and we saw where Tua was throwing the ball where his receivers should be, but because the defenders were knocking those receivers off their route path, he just looked like a deer in headlights when he was forced to work outside the confines of the offense. So I think it's a little bit of both. You want to see Mike McDaniel make some adjustments, and you also want to see Tua be able to kind of play off script a little bit and make some plays happen. But David, same question to you. Are we benching Tua? I mean, if you can go get a guy like Mike White or Jared Goff or Brock Purdy, are you thinking about playing one of those streaming options ahead of Tua?
Maybe not one of those specifically, but yeah, I'm looking at other options for sure. Their last game against Buffalo, he didn't look pretty. It looks like he had 13 completions for 186 yards and 1 touchdown. That's not great. Now you're traveling to Buffalo, and you got a lot more on your plate, and you got the weather elements. Tyreek Hill had his ankle thing, which doesn't seem like a problem, but we know how cold and snow and slippery elements tend to zap speed from receivers, and that's Miami's whole offense is speed, right? Mostert and Hill and Waddle. So I'm not feeling very good about it. And then I like playing the hot streak, like you said, and same goes for a cold streak. And he's definitely in a cold streak right now, facing one of the best defenses in the league. And Vegas has their total at, I think it was 17.5 points the last time I checked, which is disgusting. So yeah. You're not comfortable there. You're not comfortable from Vegas. You're not comfortable on the streak he's been in. You're not comfortable with the elements. It's just all signs point towards any other direction and top 15 range, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this is tough because it's one of those situations where if you're in the fantasy playoffs right now, you likely got there on the back of Tua Tagovailoa. Right. It was a fantastic draft pick, but now you're in a situation where you might have to make a little bit of a change. And, this is the time of year where I think during the regular season in fantasy, you can play it a little bit more conservatively and just hope that, the variance will even itself out over time and you can get into the playoffs. But you really need to swing for the fences. And right now, I don't know if there's really a high-end range of outcomes for Tua Tagovailoa. So I think we're all kind of in agreement here. If you can go out and get somebody, I think for me, Tua is just outside of my top 15. So tough for anybody that has rode him this far. Going to be dealing with a tough decision this week. But anyway, want to thank everybody for tuning into what is now episode 57 of The Launchpad. Last week, I was joined with Jeff Bell and Christian Williams. We were looking at week 14 matchups, helping you prep for your playoff push. And now today, I am joined with Zareh, I'll let you introduce yourself because I don't want to botch the last name here. And David Zäch, and we are going to look at some Week 15 matchups. So Zareh, go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you. Football Guys, yards per Dynasty Nerds, but plug your social media, what you're working on, and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, guys, I'm Zareh Kantzabedian, ZKantzFF on Twitter. Yeah, I'm primarily found on Twitter. I don't have any TikTok or Instagram. I'm trying to be an outrovert. I'm just introverted by nature. I can't do the song and dance and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just kind of tweeting away. I'm most active. You'll know I'm most active when I'm kind of writing an article. So I'll just be pumping out a bunch of random stats. But yeah, I'm primarily doing dynasty work at Footballguys right now, and that's my home base for now.
Yeah, you could always tell when a content creator is in the middle of a really good article because every 5 minutes you're just getting stat after stat after stat after stat hitting the timeline. I can completely relate to that. On the right side of my screen, I'm joined with David Zäch. You can find him over at Dynasty Nerds. You can also find all of his rankings on the expert consensus ranking platform at Fantasy Pros, and he does Z scores. So, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about Z scores and where everyone can find you on social media?
Yeah, so I kind of started this rookie analysis with kind of every analytical model that I could throw at a rookie and project that over their careers. And that's how I kind of got my kickstart in the industry. So that's what really set me off. And those seem to do well year after year after year. So I keep adding to them, taking away, adding in film scores, other things. And that's been a successful venture for me. But yeah, you can find some of my work at Dynasty Nerds and, like you said, Fantasy Pros. And each week I set out my matchups in motion that hopefully help you with your lineup decisions along with the ECR rankings, like you said, each week. So.
Yep. And we will be sure to talk some more this offseason. Right now, we're focused on Week 15, but I will definitely be picking your brain about some prospect analysis in the offseason. Oh, yeah. But let's go ahead. We already started talking about this Miami Dolphins, Buffalo Bills game a little bit, and there's a lot on the line. I mean, this AFC East is so tight right now that a loss right here could kind of derail the Dolphins' entire season. Maybe getting a little bit hyperbolic there, but things could get a little wild. So what I want to talk about right now is Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert is presumably healthy, but he looks like he's had some sort of ailment the last few weeks. Jeff Wilson Jr. has not practiced at all this week with a hip injury. So I don't really know what to do with this backfield. David, start us off here. Is there any Miami Dolphins running back that you would start this week?
Well, like you said, it all depends on your what you're looking at for the rest of your options. And Mostert's been kind of the hot hand there, and every time he's been healthy, he saw at least 50% of the snap share and averaging 12.8 touches per game. Again, when healthy, aside from that first week when they were kind of getting used to everything. With Wilson's injury, I'm a little skeptical of stuff like that. Whenever a guy is not practicing on a Thursday even, he's out of my lineup completely. So I have a bunch of playoff lineups right now that Wilson's just off my table completely. I don't care if he practices in full tomorrow. I'm not starting him regardless. And Mostert, I have to have some pretty deep lineups in order to be considering starting him. Like I said, that Dolphins total really has me sheepish this week, but maybe they keep it more on the ground if the elements are that sloppy too. So you never know. But if Wilson is ruled out, that would lean me more towards him because you got guaranteed volume there at least. And then even if they do have sloppy elements or whatever, they're still going to run the ball. So.
And this backfield has been nothing but a headache because early in the season, everybody thought Chase Edmonds was the guy. They started him for a few weeks. He was beyond disappointing. And then after Chase Edmonds, people finally warmed up to Raheem Mostert. And then all of a sudden they traded for Jeff Wilson. And then it looked like he was the guy. And then he left you burned a few weeks ago. So I'm kind of with you. I mean, maybe in a deep league, you can go with Raheem Mostert, but I'm not feeling too good about anybody in this backfield. Z, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I can't really justify playing devil's advocate over here. I mean, I really don't trust any of these guys. We thought it was going to go back to Jeff Wilson after the Niners game. We thought the Niners game was an outlier because it was the Niners. And then, to open the Chargers game, Raheem Mostert had every single drive for the first quarter, and Jeff Wilson came out. He got his first touch on the first drive of the second quarter. And it's not even like they're switching drives. It seems like they're switching quarters. And right now you just can't trust it. We don't know, we're not behavioral, analysts. We don't understand how, coaches think. I wish we did, and that would be a huge piece of the puzzle. And Mike McDaniels comes from that Shanahan tree where they just do crazy things with running backs. And it's beyond me. If it's not McCaffrey, don't trust really any running back in that kind of system, so.
Maybe Bam Knight, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But let's talk about the other backfield too in Buffalo. And it seems like this happens every single year because you get these veterans that start off the year strong and then the rookie slowly starts to take over. And then all of a sudden we're dealing with fantasy playoffs are here, and we don't really know how to make sense of these backfields. It looked like James Cook was taking over from Devin Singletary, but then James Cook did almost nothing last week. So, Z, do you prefer either of these guys, Devin Singletary or James Cook, this week?
I don't mind them actually as RB2s. And, going back to James Cook and how he was building momentum 2 weeks ago, I believe he had a 49% snap share. And then I was skeptical going into last week because we've seen this kind of fluctuate. We've seen this pattern of the Bills and how we just can't rely on the running backs back there. But James Cook actually held a plus 40% snap share going into last week. I think he played 43 or 44% of the snaps. So he was on the field, and they're trying to get him on the field more often. Going back to like Devin Singletary, I think he finished as RB1 when they last played Miami in week 2 or week 3. He finishes the RB1 overall on 11 targets or 12 targets. He got it through the air. So the Bills could just stick to that game plan, providing that the weather, influences that offensive game plan more, a more run-oriented game plan. James Cook can get more run now that he's seeing more consistent snap shares. So I don't mind them if you have to. Honestly, I like both of them over the Dolphins running backs. I feel much more comfortable with them over the Dolphins running backs. So, they should see some targets through the air, I think, and plenty of run.
I like it, yeah, and I think the ceiling, just given the ecosystem that they're in with the Buffalo Bills offense, may have been sputtering over the last couple of weeks, but at the end of the day, they're running backs that are going to get touches at home on a Buffalo offense. So I'm with you on that. David, anything that you would like to add about the Buffalo Bills backfield?
No, I feel pretty similarly. James Cook has 1 touchdown, I believe, on the entire year, so that makes me a little shy about him and lean into Singletary a little more. I always like the vet in critical games as well. I feel like teams like to lean on the guy who's been in the system longer a little more. That's just a personal idea I have. That I have no tracks or stats to back that one up, but that's just how it feels like when I watch some games. So yeah, I'm with you there. If I got to start one, I'm gonna pick Singletary above, and I agree with Z that I would take either of them over the Miami running backs.
And I'm sure somebody has done a study, somebody smarter than I has dug into this before. But yeah, you see that all the time in critical division matchups. You see the guys that have familiarity with the system get a little bit more run. So I do have Devin Singletary a bit ahead of James Cook, but James Cook makes for a solid streamer if you're in a pinch this week. Now, the last thing we talk about, and we have pretty much agreed on everything. We're 12 minutes into the show, and we have agreed on everything so far. So hopefully Gabe Davis will be a little bit more polarizing. David, why don't you start us off here? I mean, he has had some stinkers lately. I mean, it's been really bad. 5 of his last 7 games, he's been outside of the top 40 wide receivers. Even overall season wide, like with those spike weeks, he's still wide receiver 30. So are you starting him this week in what is a very critical week for a lot of fantasy managers?
I'm a tough guy to ask because I've been a Gabe Davis hater at ADP for all year long, and I thought I was very wrong coming out of the gate that first month where he had those couple splash games, and now he's just petering like 2 to 3 receptions a game. He's had under 40 yards reception in 5 of his last 7 games. That's just terrible, even with the touchdown variance. I don't know how you can trust him, and I'm not going to start him if I did have him, but I of course have him nowhere because I've never trusted him all along. So it's a tough case for me to give advice on someone, but just look at his recent games, look how they're trending. You're praying for a touchdown if you are starting him, in my opinion.
Yeah, and not just a touchdown. You're praying for a deep touchdown because even if he does catch a touchdown on his pace of 2 catches and 15 yards per game, that still isn't even helping you out that much. Like, you need that big score for him to pay off. So, Z, what are you thinking? Is there something maybe in this Miami defense that's exploitable where we can finally see another Gabe Davis boom week?
I mean, I agree with you guys. He's as volatile as they come. But, I mean, like, this is a copycat league, right? You hear that all the time. And we did see Mike Williams burn the heck out of the secondary for some deep passes last week. So they might utilize that again. Again, the weather just doesn't encourage that kind of style of play this week. But, who knows? It's Buffalo. They can play in their own weather. I'm not going to – it doesn't really work against them. So that's the silver lining for me with Davis is that, like, Mike Williams got him, burned him deep. Maybe Gabe Davis can do the same. He is that guy. Gabe Davis, he's a top 30 wide receiver, right? So among the top, he's a top 30 wide receiver on the year. Among the top 30 wide receivers right now, he leads all of them in air yards. He's number 1 in air yards per reception at 14.5 air yards per reception. Chris Olave is in second with 12 air yards per reception. So, I mean, that just speaks to his volatility. I mean, and you have to kind of consider that. And when you're building your lineup, it's all about like how you want to, structure your lineup and what you're going up against. Do you need that kind of volatility? Is it necessary? Because that's very, very high, like boom or bust player. And, if he hits, he hits. So you got to really take into consideration and, develop the courage for Gabe Davis before going into the game. And I just want to say I was a Gabe Davis supporter going into the year, but not because of the vacated opportunity. I had Gabe Davis on a dynasty or 2 dynasty leagues for 2 years, sitting on him for the longest time. So that's I come from a different world. I'm from a different paradigm of Gabe Davis supporting. Like I've been holding Zay Jones. He's another guy I kind of held when I remember I put a picture of Gabe Davis, Alan Lazard, and Zay Jones on my bench on Twitter, and I said, "Daddy needs a new wide receiver too." And everybody was like, "Look elsewhere, man! Look elsewhere." I was like, and they're all like pretty much like wide receiver 2-ish guys, And Zay Jones is having wide receiver 1 week, so yay.
Yeah, 3 very similar players, and I think you have the right. Like Gabe Davis is a very fun player, and the measurables you can't ignore him. I mean, big, tall, fast, strong. He's got all the measurables you want to see in a wide receiver. I think the only real problem was that he was getting drafted in the 3rd and 4th round this offseason, which was just a little bit too steep in redraft and best ball leagues. So I have no problem with Gabe Davis, the player. I think he's a very good player. I just didn't like his ADP all that much this offseason. But I think that the only reason, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit here, Z, so maybe I'm talking out of line, but you said that, maybe there's a situation with the way that you're building your roster that you'd start him. And I think that's it. Like if you're the 6th seed and you're playing against the juggernaut 1 seed in your league and you just lost Kyler Murray and, you're dealing with some injuries and you need that type of huge boom week, then go ahead and play Gabe Davis. But if you're confident in the rest of your team, just know that the floor there is literally 0. So starting Gabe Davis does carry a lot of risk. But anyway, we've talked enough about that game. It is time for everybody's favorite segment of the week, the Sleeper Start of the Week. We do this every single week. It is sponsored by Sleeper, which is our favorite fantasy platform. They have 22 new features this year, and they are adding new features constantly. So if you have not already, be sure to check in the YouTube description or the podcast description, where you can find a link to download Sleeper.
It's time for the Sleeper Start of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
Z, why don't you start us off here? Who is your sleeper of the week?
This was tough. I was torn between 2 guys. I was torn between Pierre Strong Jr. and Jahan Dotson, but I ultimately went with Jahan Dotson because, so Jahan Dotson to start the year, he was consistently producing as a wide receiver 1 or 2 to start the year out of the gate, a rookie wide receiver, right? So to start the year, before he was injured, he scored 16.5 fantasy points, 16.9 fantasy points, 2 fantasy points, and then 11.8 fantasy points, right? And then he got injured, and then they started to ease him in for a couple weeks. They just had a bye, but the game before their bye was at the New York Giants. He received his full complement of snaps again, and he scored 13.9 fantasy points, right? So this guy in 8 games, he scored 6 touchdowns, right? And his ownership right now on Sleeper is just 38%. So it's likely he's out there, and he's a wide receiver 2 who you can put in for your 3rd wide receiver spot if you see him just sitting out there. And I think he's got a good chance again. They're playing the Giants again, but this time at home. So he's got another good opportunity to put up a solid fantasy day with some upside.
Yeah, I mean, Jahan Dotson might be one of the most disrespected first-round wide receivers we've seen in a long time. And the only thing that I can really think of is his name sounds like Josh Dotson, and he got drafted to Washington, and that's why everybody dislikes him, because he's looked really good this year. And like you said, the fact that a first-round wide receiver is only rostered in 38% of leagues is mind-blowing. So I really like that call-out, Z. David, who is your sleeper start of the week?
Yeah, I didn't know how deep to go here, but I actually got a guy from the same team, and hopefully your touchdown magnet, Jahan Dotson, doesn't take from him. But Brian Robinson's kind of my pick. He's been kind of hot and cold this year, and obviously came back from a gruesome gunshot wound this offseason to have probably the comeback story of the year for in-season play anyway. But yeah, they just played the Giants at MetLife, and he had over 100 total scrimmage yards. And now they had a bye, get healthy, get rested, and then they come back and play at home against the Giants again as 4.5-point favorites. So We got a run favorable spread. He's shown he can do it before. They also have the second fastest pace for a game this week, according to Vegas as well. So I like everything out there. There should be volume. Hopefully he sneaks one of those touchdowns in, and I imagine he could go for over 100 yards yet again.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of Brian Robinson coming into the league. Just really struggled to do much at Alabama. It took him to his 5th year to finally become the starter there. And, the fact that he couldn't hurdle over Najee Harris, that was kind of a red flag for me. And then he started off the year, didn't look too great, but I'll kind of give him a pass there because, like you said, coming back from that injury. But man, he looked like the real deal last week. So I'm completely with you. This time of year is when you ride the hot hand. And right now, Brian Robinson looks like the hot hand. So thank you for both of those, Jahan Dotson and Brian Robinson. And I got to tell you guys, this happens often with this segment, with the sleeper starts of the week, where we end up hitting on 2 players from the same game. And sometimes the game script just works that way. So appreciate that call out. Be sure to download Sleeper if you have not already. Now let's go ahead and jump into the next game that I want to talk about here. And we're not going to be talking about the game finish or anything here, because I think we know who's probably going to run away with this one. Kansas City Chiefs going into Houston to play against the Houston Texans. I can't believe I'm even asking this question, but Patrick Mahomes going against arguably the worst defense in the league. However, quarterbacks haven't had to throw against Houston, so they are giving up an average of 12.1 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. David, you're not benching Mahomes, right?
No, like I've written down here, I'm like, anytime you can bench the number 2 fantasy scorer in the entire world, I don't think that's a good idea. So yeah, they got a 31 point expected points, and I think it's fair to say that Mahomes is going to get at least 2 touchdowns regardless of what's happening. Chiefs are just notorious for finding creative ways to score, right? Like whether it's getting Noah Gray the ball or Justin Watson on a 30-yard bomb or something like that. Hopefully they don't give any handoffs to tight ends again and score that way, but we'll see. But yeah, I don't think there's any reasonable way you can bench him at all or even consider it. But I get the concern with it, but I don't think their running back stable is quite up to par as some of the teams that have faced Texans and can rely on their running backs. Like Isaiah Pacheco's a rookie. McKinnon, watching him run into the back of the lineman is almost comical when they try to run him up the middle, but they love doing it. He's great in space though. So, but no, I think he's pretty safe with a 2 touchdown floor, but we'll see.
And every once in a while on these, I will ask these questions that I know the answer to, that you know the answer to, but sometimes we just have to have this discussion for the audience. If you have Patrick Mahomes, do not bench him. Don't get scared by this difficult matchup. It's still Patrick Mahomes, and like you said, he's still going to end up scoring. And I love Isaiah Pacheco this week. I love Jerick McKinnon this week, but that doesn't mean that you're benching Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes. You are starting these guys with confidence. Z, I'm not even going to ask you the question because I know that you were going to answer the same way, unless you got something to add.
I got something to add though. It's definitely not don't bench Mahomes. We're not going to even have that. But so like if you go on NFL.com and you look at points against for defenses, the Texans are ranked the second hardest defense for opposing quarterbacks, right? And you look at that, and Dave, when I saw that question, I definitely raised my eyebrow, and I gave me pause for sure. And you have to look at it, and you're like, okay, let's look at their matchups. So this has been the matchups for the Houston Texans defense, right? Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, early season Justin Fields, early season Trevor Lawrence when he was all wonky, Malik Willis, Daniel Jones, Taylor Heineke, and Deshaun Watson in his first game. Right. So those are the quarterbacks they've played, which completely skews the ranking of their supposed tough, second ranked toughest defense for quarterbacks. So yeah, and Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert was like the one legitimate quarterback they played. And I think he finishes like QB 8, 7, or 9 or something like that. So
and he was still dealing with the broken ribs during that game, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
so
that was still like in the last quarter of the season. Yeah.
So that is fantastic added context to this. Yeah, you're not even thinking about it. And then some people say, well, they want to run against this team because their pass defense is good and their run defense is terrible. That is not a good pass defense. We saw what Dak Prescott did to them in less than a minute yesterday or last week. Just drove the entire field through the air with ease. So yeah, I've got no concerns whatsoever about the Chiefs. But let's follow up that question because we do expect them to run the ball a lot. So Isaiah Pacheco, Jerick McKinnon, everybody has the idea that this is an Isaiah Pacheco week, and rightfully so. I think that he is set to smash. But should we be looking at both of the running backs this week as top 20 options? What do you think, Z?
Yeah, I think you actually can. I mean, both are top 20 options. Pacheco hasn't really been getting he hasn't been getting much of a snap share. It's actually been kind of falling. He's been hovering between 40 to 56, and last week he saw his lowest snap share, but he's making the most out of his opportunities. And Pacheco, his athleticism, we haven't even seen him break one yet. That's coming. It's got to come sooner or later. He's going to break one. McKinnon. It seems like when I'm looking at McKinnon's target shares or target totals, the Chiefs like to utilize McKinnon against teams that are susceptible to pass catching running backs, right? So like McKinnon has seen anywhere between 6 to 8 targets against said teams that are susceptible. So Tennessee, Jacksonville, and Denver are all top 10 easiest matchups for pass catching running backs, and he's seen 6 to 8 targets in all of those. Now, I believe the Texans, actually I might have forgotten to look, but I believe the Texans are up there too as one of the top matchups for pass catching running backs. So if that's the case, and if I'm picking up on that, then the Chiefs definitely are too, and they're going to utilize McKinnon in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, what I see in this matchup is this backfield between the two of them is probably going to produce somewhere between 35 and 45 points. I don't know exactly whose favor it's going to tip in, but I think that there's just going to be a ton of fantasy points between Pacheco and McKinnon. So I'm with you. David, I know you do ranking. Are you thinking about putting these guys both in your top 20, or is that just a little bit too steep?
Yeah, so I see it just a little bit differently. I think McKinnon's touchdowns last week were extremely fluky. Like he broke some long ones, right? And that's got everyone, very into McKinnon this week. Granted, he has that pretty safe reception floor, but I don't think he finds the end zone this week in particular. Or if he does, I think it's going to be a rarity if he does. So I think I do like, Pacheco for 15 to 20 carries and like that. But like Z said, you haven't really seen him break a big one yet. So I'm a little concerned on him as well. So I have them both boosted a bit from my regular spots, but I think that puts Pacheco around running back 16 and McKinnon around running back 34 only for me. So I don't see it tipping the scales quite that heavy because, like I said, I do think Mahomes still gets his. It's just whether or not that goes to McKinnon again, right, or not, because I don't think he's going to get a rushing touchdown. I don't like the way they use him in between the tackles. He doesn't seem to flourish there, and I think that's Pacheco territory, which this game script is definitely in favor of a Pacheco-style game, though.
So we finally have something, a conversation where we're on a little bit different here. I think this is the first topic that we've talked about because I see it a little bit differently. I got Pacheco as my RB11 and I've got McKinnon as my RB17. So I'm firing both of these guys up very confidently. And I think the trend that I noticed, we're looking at 3 games now without Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And in that first game without Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Isaiah Pacheco, they wanted him to be the workhorse. And he was just kind of inefficient once they got inside the red zone. He is terrible at pass blocking. That's one thing that he cannot do well at all. And that just so happens to be one of Jerick McKinnon's biggest strengths. So with them liking, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, with them getting so creative in the red zone and when they get near the goal line, McKinnon has completely siphoned all of those touches away. So in the first week without Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 12-2, Isaiah Pacheco dominated the red zone touches. In the last 2 games, McKinnon has seen those red zone touches on an 8-2 clip. So he has kind of taken over that role. So that's why I think I like both of these guys. And I think that both of you kind of said the right thing here, Z. I think that Pacheco, this is finally the game where we see him break off a big run. But I also think that McKinnon, with his ability as a pass blocker, he's going to get those red zone touches and could end up, even if it's a receiving catch, I think that he does find his way into the end zone again. So no doubt about it. Wide range of outcomes for both of these guys. And I realize that I am way off the consensus where his ranking, Jerick McKinnon's, is RB38. I've got him as RB17. So I realize I'm the one that's a little bit out of pocket here, but just something that I thought would be a little bit fun to talk about. So let's stick with this game. And the last thing I want to talk about is Chris Moore. 10 catches and 124 yards yesterday. I mean, we thought that he might be a decent streamer, but I don't think anybody saw that type of performance come in. So it looks like Nico Collins is going to be out. Brandon Cooks kind of on the fence, but who knows what's happening with him. So David, start us off here. Do we like Chris Moore as a streamer again this week?
Oh, you got to love him if you're in a pinch for a wide receiver, right? He's in the waiver in a lot of leagues. I forget the number that it was at, but with Cooks, limited now, it turns out, instead of just out of practice, and Nico looking like he's going to miss again. And more importantly, Dameon Pierce is going to miss the game. So they're going to definitely rely on a lot more different people than, force feeding Pierce 30 touches a game, for God's sakes, regardless of game script. It just still blows my mind that they do that in any game, no matter a 3-score deficit, they'll just feed Pierce no matter what. So they can't do that now. They can't do that now. So I'm very curious how they improvise, and whether it's, Jeff Driscoll throwing the ball or Davis Mills. God knows what they're doing there. But I think they are going to pass quite a bit more than they have been. I don't think Dare or Rex Burkhead are designed to carry the rock, 10 plus times. I think Rex is capable of it. Dare, maybe, I guess he's had a couple games like that, but those guys are a little more pass catchy than grinders. So I think Moore is going to see his fair share. I mean, minimum 10 targets, I'm thinking. So I got him as a top 40 wide receiver this week.
Yeah, in a game where we're looking at the top 3 options possibly not playing, and a game script that is going to really push the Houston Texans into having to push the ball a little bit harder than they probably want to, I think we got another decent streaming option. So, Z, what do we think about Ogunbowale this week? Is he somebody that you're thinking about maybe plugging in, or is that just a pure trap?
Yeah, man, I was looking at this and I was like going back and forth. I was like, Rex Burkhead or Ogunbowale? I was going back and forth. I'm like, why am I thinking so hard about this decision? I'm like, first of all, we're not in bye week, so I doubt anybody who made it to the playoffs really needs these two. But okay, look, so, in all fairness for the discussion, I will say this. This is the Chiefs versus receiving running backs, right? They're first in receptions allowed to receiving running backs. They're second in yards allowed and third in receiving touchdowns allowed. Now, so take that for what it's worth. I don't know who's going to get the ball here. Rex Burkhead, after he saw 11 rush attempts in week 1, he's seen 10 rush attempts all year long after that. Ogunbowale, yeah, it's just, I mean, if you got to throw a dart, Ogunbowale, just throw it. And just, you're not allowed to get mad if you don't hit. You're just not allowed to. And no one's going to listen to you complain about it on Twitter. No one cares. So, just do what you have. If you're going to do it, start Ogunbowale. The matchup is good. Dave, you said Lovie Smith loves to utilize running backs. So, somebody could get fed here. And, again, Zareh, I guess.
Yeah. And again, nobody feels good about it, but, some people might be in a pinch with injuries or whatever it may be. So I don't think we're advocating for him that strongly, but you could do worse if you're shopping the waiver wire right now. I've had enough of this game. Let's move on to the next game. Cincinnati Bengals in Tampa Bay facing off against the Buccaneers. And first question I got, Z, start us off here, man. What are we doing about T. Higgins? That's it. That's the question.
T. Higgins, we all know what T. Higgins, he's a great fantasy asset. We don't have to discuss what he's done. He's solid. Last week that comes with the territory. I mean, I'm not sure if he got, he injured his hamstring in pregame warmups. Now I'm not sure if there was a report released or if Zach Taylor just kept it from everybody and, decided not to report on it. But this is the nature of the beast. T. Higgins this week, I believe he was limited in practice today. And that's a red flag, right? Right now, looking at Zach Taylor and how he's been with T. Higgins, if T. Higgins is limited at all with a hamstring injury, I don't want to start him. I will say this, though. T. Higgins this week has a good matchup coming up. Jamel Dean for the Bucs, the cornerback. He's been the best outside cornerback for the Bucs. He's likely not going to play this week, which leaves Carlton Davis and Sean Murphy-Bunting in the slot. I think Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are going to eat, especially if Jamel Dean, who is not going to play. So, I mean, if you have to start Higgins, start him, and just hope that Zach Taylor doesn't do anything crazy. But if you can pivot to like Olave or Keenan Allen, who you might have been sitting on or something like that, like I would rather pivot. It's just sad that we have to have this conversation. But yeah, that's I'm not even sure if I answered the question. You asked me if I should start him. Yeah, if you have to start him.
So let me throw an actual one out there, because this is actually in my I'm in a league right now where I can only start one of these guys. And for me, it's T. Higgins, who is the guy I want to start. And then on the bench, I've got Christian Watson, Marquise Brown. Would you start either of those guys ahead of T. Higgins if he logs a limited practice on Friday?
On Friday, I think I start Christian Watson over Higgins, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's tough out here. And I think that's really what it comes down to. We're recording right now on Thursday afternoon. They're going to practice on Friday. I think if he's limited in practice, I'm probably knocking him about 15, 20 spots down my rankings if he's limited. I want to see that full practice because this is Zach Taylor we're dealing about. Zach Taylor does not care about your fantasy teams. He doesn't care about any sort of integrity when it comes to injury reports. You got to remember, Joe Mixon was day-to-day for 11 weeks and never played again in 2020. This is just what Zach Taylor does. So I don't think you can trust anything coming out of his mouth. You need to see a full practice if you want any confidence in T. Higgins. David, do you have anything to add to this? How are you feeling about T. Higgins, or do you think we kind of covered it?
I had the same exact line in there. The only way I'm starting Higgins is if he's fully cleared as a full practice. I did want to note that I saw a tweet from Kyle Lindemann that Zach Taylor and the Bengals should be fined $500,000 for duping the fantasy and betting community into playing T. Higgins last week. I thought that was rich because he did. He tricked us all, right? Like, if you had T. Higgins, you started him last week because he got cleared right before the game, and then they just didn't use him. So
yeah. I had multiple leagues where I was sweating it out with T. Higgins because you see removed from the injury report, cool, all signs are go, plug him in, and then to see him take one snap and come off the field. And funny enough, that tweet you referenced from Kyle Lindebaum actually made it to Pardon My Take, where Big Cat was talking about it. I mean, that really made the rounds because people were furious about it. Rightfully so, yeah. So last thing I want to talk about with the Bengals is Samaje Perine, because he looked, I hate to say this, I know this is going to be blasphemous to some people, but I think he looked better than Joe Mixon when he was playing, in his relief role. And then we saw Joe Mixon come back last week, but Samaje Perine might have siphoned a little bit of workload, which isn't something we typically see when the lead back comes back. So, David, talk us through this. Is Samaje Perine going to maintain this role? Does it lower Joe Mixon's ceiling? What's happening right now in this Cincinnati backfield?
Yeah, I think he's earned a spot to at least earn some touches. So I have him back as a transition with Mixon getting back healthy. I have him back to roughly around 40%, maybe a little lower, but he has that receiving upside. And to your point, he's just kind of looked better than Mixon. So who knows how they play into that, and if they lean into his playmaking that he's been making a lot. So. And you got, questions with Higgins. You got questions with Boyd. Hurst is looking like it's out. So, like, who's getting the ball there? Jamar Chase for sure. Joe Mixon for sure. But who else are they going to distribute it to? Maybe they use 2 running back sets just a little bit more with Perine in there because they don't have any other playmakers on the field. But we'll see how the injury reports shake out. But, yeah, I don't feel good about starting him anyway because, Mixon is back and it's tough to trust, especially in the fantasy playoffs. So I'm looking elsewhere as far as a starter.
And I think you nailed it, that last week was Mixon's first week back. And a lot of times we do see that where he kind of gets eased into the role. But I'm with you that I think that this week we do see it tip a little bit heavier in Joe Mixon's favor. Z, what do you think about this backfield?
Yeah, I think, David, I think you make a lot of good points. And I'm kind of like, I was kind of scared about Joe Mixon, but I mean, a 58% snap share for being eased back in as a baseline snap share is really encouraging. And, I think we can only see it go up from there. I mean, also, I think, Samaje Perine, he kind of got lucky with a touchdown that he ran in. So, I mean, outside of that, he wouldn't really have come up on the radar if he never got that one touchdown. Outside of that, he really didn't have much production. He did see some targets, so we'll see if that continues. But I think, Joe Mixon is a safe bet for 60+% snap share. Also going in a matchup where the Buccaneers are projected to be without, the animal Vita Vea. He's supposed to not be active for this week. So if he's not active, I mean, I'm really not showing any kind of hesitancy in starting Joe Mixon this week.
Yep. Agree with everything you said there. Now, I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain. I pre-planned for the show by writing up some questions that I want to ask. And when I wrote out this next question, I thought, I can't even ask this. This is a crazy question. And then I went on Chris Harris's podcast this morning, and he asked me this exact question. So I think it's worth talking about. Mike Evans has been ice cold for, pretty much since week 5. He hasn't done much of anything at all. So crazy that we're asking this at all, but hasn't scored since week 4, averaging just 63 yards a game over that stretch. David, are fantasy managers crazy for thinking about benching Mike Evans this week?
I don't think so, but I still have him pretty high. I'm very into positive touchdown regression as far as the average wide receiver rate is about 150 yards per touchdown. Mike Evans is sitting at 270 yards per touchdown. He had that monster touchdown called back last week on a silly holding call. So, I mean, he's there. They're trying to get him the ball. I think I've seen a couple of them actually called back on Evans this year for penalties that
or
happened
dropped
elsewhere.
or sailed over his head.
Yeah,
I mean,
the dropped one. I forgot about that one.
There have been like a dozen would-be Mike Evans touchdowns that were just that close.
He's got to be just infuriating for DFS players. But I still have him a bit up there. I think he bounces back some, and there's a potential for a shootout in this game. And Buccaneers are getting into the kind of must-win to keep playoff hopes alive, because believe it or not, the Falcons and Panthers are somehow nipping at their heels for the division title. But we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I would still start them, even though it doesn't feel good, pending the options that you have. So,
Z, what about you? Are you possibly benching him? Depending on who else you have, but where does he kind of fall in for you this week?
Yeah, that's really it. It's really on who else you have. Like 5-week slide is kind of considerable, and it's not through any fault of its own. It's kind of like Tom Brady in the offensive line and trying to get the ball out on time and being comfortable in the pocket and the pass rush he's getting in his face. It's really difficult, honestly. Like, I like Chris Godwin a lot better in this matchup, just because the slot cornerback for the Bengals, Mike Hilton, is probably going to be out, which is only going to encourage Tom Brady to look at Chris Godwin a lot more. Chris Godwin should feast. But I mean, if you got to start Mike Evans, it's fine. He's probably going to get you like 8 fantasy points, 10 fantasy points as a baseline. But just be ready. Like, he's not volatile like Gabe Davis. But what's interesting is that Mike Evans, he's wide receiver. I believe he's wide receiver 22 or 23 on the year, and Gabe Davis is right behind him at 23 or 24.
Might as well call him Mike Davis then.
Yeah,
Gabe Evans.
It's Gabe Evans, same thing, man. So yeah, I guess they are. I mean, look, like Jalen Waddle, like, he's been on a slide lately, and he's been regarded as a top 10 wide receiver in ECR rankings every single week, and he's been like forsaken from the fantasy community this week. If you look on Twitter, everybody's just like, no one wants to start Waddle this week. No one's feeling good about it, and for some reason we're still there. Mike Evans, we're still holding on to Mike Evans, and it has been working out. No matter how close the ball has been coming to his fingertips or how far it's been sailing over his head, it has been getting done. Touchdowns have been getting called back. Now, David, you alluded to touchdown regression, and I believe in touchdown regression too. But like, do you want to wait for it to come around in fantasy playoffs, or like, I mean, that's just, I'd rather wait for touchdown regression to come during the regular season and not during the fantasy playoffs.
So that's a fair point. Really high risk, right?
Yeah, I feel like it is a little bit. And it depends on who you have. Like, again, like, I wish I had a list of wide receivers in front of me we can go over, but
let's throw a name out there, and this is going to be a crazy question, but we talked about him a little bit earlier. Chris Moore, is that a guy you'd think about putting in over Mike Evans, or is that just getting a little too cute with it?
I mean, I saw David just definitely clinch. I wouldn't hate it. I mean, I would 11 targets on a 90% catch rate and 12 something yards per reception in I think the easiest matchup for wide receivers with that target volume. No, I don't hate it. I mean, it's a legitimate process if you want to lean towards Chris Moore. I mean, that volume alone in a PPR format, I mean, it's valuable. So I mean, I don't hate it at all.
I think this is the time of year where you're not hoping to just kind of ease into the playoffs over the course of a full season. You really need to swing for the fences with every single pick. So there's a lot of overthinking that happens this time of year, but I don't think that benching Evans is really overthinking. But David, you also make some great points that the variance could swing in his direction any given week, and we could get that boom week. So luckily I have no Mike Evans, so I'm not stressing about this, but man, do I feel for anybody who is in that position. Last thing I want to talk about with this game, though, and I feel like we've been having this conversation for 5 weeks straight, and nobody has an answer yet. Dave, start us off here. Rachaad White or Leonard Fournette? Who do you prefer this week?
Fournette. I've always had Fournette ahead as long as he's healthy. They love using him in the red zone, right? He has, a 10 reception ceiling on some of his games. It's just absurd. They love dumping the ball off to him on quick drives too. He's typically the 2-minute drive guy. I know Rachaad has been blending in some, but as long as Fournette's healthy, he's always led the snaps, right? And he has just monster receiving upside, regardless of how many yards he gets after or how slow his feet piddle paddle after he catches the ball. And people like to rag on him for that. But I mean, he catches the ball, he gets red zone uses. I think he scores this weekend, but we'll find out, right? What about you, Z?
I think I'd rather go Rachaad White in this one. Rachaad White he just seems like he's got the better. he's got the secure this receiving. He's more of the profile of the receiving running back. He seems like to have secured that. He seems to have secured that role. Fournette's also getting targets, but I agree with you that Fournette is more red zone favored in the red zone. But Rachaad White he feels a bit more game dependent. They both seem to be like an even split. But if I had to, I'd lead Rachaad White. Even with Fournette back, I think he's finished as like a RB2 both weeks that Fournette's been back. They're both fine options. I just prefer Rachaad White. I'm under the assumption that he has been a better receiving running back and better utilized in that part.
Yeah, you say that. I was just looking up his receptions here, and I see that they are upticking quite a bit lately. So that'll be curious to see who wins the battle on receiving upside here.
Yeah,
and what I'll say, I appreciate the discourse between you two. I completely copped out my rankings this week. They are my RB29 and RB30 back to back, and I'm not even going to tell you which one is ahead because I don't really have a firm stance. I like both of these guys, and they're seeing very similar usage. One thing that I'll point out, though, and this kind of flew under the radar, I was surprised it didn't get more traction on social media. But in that, you guys remember 2 weeks ago, Rachaad White had that game-winning touchdown catch. I don't know if you saw it, but there were 8 seconds left in the game. Leonard Fournette was in the huddle, and Tom Brady pushed Leonard Fournette out of the huddle and called for Rachaad White and then threw the ball to him. So that says a lot. If you've got the trust, you are now in Tom Brady's inner circle of trust.
Is that for real?
That actually happened, yeah. And you see him.
Oh my God, I gotta look that up.
You can read his lips. He's yelling to the sideline saying, "We need Rachaad." And then they made the substitute. Wow. Rachaad White came in and he threw the game-winning touchdown to him. So that says a lot about how Tom Brady and this team feels about Rachaad White. Again,
might have to adjust my rankings after that one.
Like I said, I copped out. I don't want to put any one above the other, but both of them have shown some pretty good upside lately. Now, we got enough time to talk about one more game, and I'll put this up to a vote between you guys. I want to talk about either the Detroit Lions at the New York Jets, which I think is a really fun game to talk about, or the Arizona Cardinals at the Denver Broncos. Which one did you guys want to wrap up with here?
I like the Jets-Lions game.
Same.
David, that worked for you? All right. I love it too. There's so much to talk about here. And let's start by talking about Jared Goff. His home and away splits are just impossible to ignore. We don't want to put too much weight into that, but man, he has been red hot lately. But are you trusting him? Fantasy playoffs, win or you're out, game on the line, on the road against a stout defense in the cold. David, are we trusting Jared Goff this week?
So this one's like the perfect good angel and demon on your shoulder, because you got the hot hand of Goff, right? And I got him in a lot of leagues, so I face this decision a lot. So I'm starting him in like almost exactly 50% of leagues, like where I need a boost, I'm starting him. Where I think I have a good team, I'm not starting him. So they face one of the league's toughest secondaries, who are allowing 36 yards under their opponent's passing yard average. And Vegas has Lions down almost a full touchdown from their average scoring this year. You know, those things are extreme negatives for Goff right now. So that the analytic part of me really doesn't trust them, but I'm really big into momentum and the hot hand and everything Lions I'm buying into. I'm eating up right now. Like, I believe in the Lions. I think the Lions are going to win and, you know, maybe secure a playoff spot. So that's the part that's making me like Goff. And they got wide receivers getting healthy, right? You got Amon-Ra, you got Chark, you got Reynolds, you got Jameson Williams now making explosive plays again. So there's a lot of excitement there in that offense, but the Jets have just been locked down, right? Sauce Gardner is going to take away half the field just instantly. So that's concerning. It's just whether or not they can game plan enough. I don't know enough about these coaches to see if they can overcome that in the passing game. So that's why I'm at a 50-50 split right now. So I think I have them about quarterback 14, I believe it was in my rankings right now. So it's tough.
And the nice thing about Sauce is he doesn't travel to the slot whatsoever. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, right, the offense is still going to run through him, and you got a healthy DeAndre Swift. But let me throw this question out there. In addition to the Jared Goff discourse, who do you prefer, Jared Goff or Mike White? Because those guys, if you lost Kyler Murray, there's a good chance both of those guys are available on waivers. Who would you recommend picking up and starting?
I think I'd go Mike White over Jared Goff. I don't really have any faith in Jared Goff. David, don't just mute me if you can. Don't listen to me. I know I don't want to get you down. I don't have any
right now. The best shows come when people disagree. I've been on shows before where everybody just shakes their head and it's boring. I think the best conversation comes when people are disagreeing a little bit. So let's hear it.
Jared Goff is a fine QB2 in a super flex, and I don't mind using in that way, but this week as a QB1 and a single QB or your primary quarterback, I just don't feel good about it. It's not great. His home road splits are absolutely valid. He's just matchup dependent quarterback, and that's fine. That's just what he is. But this week he's in for a hurting this week. I'd rather have Mike White. Mike White, if you've watched like JT O'Sullivan on the QB School on YouTube, he does some really good film breakdowns. And he's talking about how Mike White is throwing with anticipation. He's stepping into his throws like he's throwing and playing confidently. And the Detroit Lions secondary has been one of the best matchups for opposing quarterbacks. The past all year round essentially. So I would like to pivot to Mike White if possible. So that's my answer for that one.
Yeah, I have Mike White as QB12, so I don't disagree with you. They're really close, but Lions have been turning it on a bit lately with their secondary, right? Like they've started to clamp down at least just a little bit and not be just complete wet paper towel like the Vikings are or something like that.
I agree with that.
And David, we're pretty much in lockstep. I got Mike White as my QB11 and Jared Goff as my QB14. So we are very much in lopstick that they're both streaming options, and we prefer Mike White, but ever so slightly. I think that they're both decent options if you got to stream somebody. But Z talked about it, that the anticipation and I think another big thing is just the confidence that Salah has in him. When they faced off against the Minnesota Vikings, which is another very bad pass defense, they let him throw the ball 57 times. And I envision a similar game plan going into this game. So Mike White's going to get to let it rip a lot this weekend. So both are good streaming options, but I think we all give the slight edge to Mike White. Another thing I want to talk about in this game, though, and we've talked about Fournette, and we've talked about Rashad White, and we've talked about Devin Singletary and James Cook, and now here we are looking at the Lions backfield. Z, who do you prefer, DeAndre Swift or Jamal Charles?
I prefer Jamal Charles. DeAndre Swift.
Jamal.
And I wish.
Yes.
No, Jamal Williams for sure. Yeah, I prefer DeAndre Swift just because we've seen his upside, right? Like I understand, like he's been all over the place, as far as his utilization. We just can't get a read on what Campbell is doing with him right now. 2 weeks ago, he went off for like 20 plus points in PPR leagues. That upside's there. Jamal Williams, I don't mind. Quinnen Williams and Jonathan Franklin Myers might be out for this game, and if that's the case, I like Jamal Williams as as a 15 rush attempt guy and a goal line, your goal line guy. He's fine. He's fine for that. But if those two guys are active, he's not going to get anything on the ground. He really doesn't produce much as a runner right now as it is, and he's just kind of like a goal line guy, touchdown or bust guy. So in a vacuum, I prefer Swift over Williams.
Yeah, I'm with you there. David, who do you prefer?
Yep, full agreement. The explosive plays that Swift brings and the receiving upside makes him hands down the option for me. Jamal's been pretty lucky on that touchdown use. I think I saw 7 or 8 of his touchdowns have been 1-yard runs at the goal line, and his receiving work is pretty much non-existent. I think he's averaging like 0.3 receptions on the year or something like that per game. So just abysmal. So yep, complete agreement. It's got to be Swift or bust for me.
And you talk about the touchdown regression with Mike Evans. Well, it goes both ways. Jamal Williams is going to continue scoring 1.2 touchdowns per game or whatever he's averaging right now. It's going to come back down to earth at some point. So, again, agree with both of you guys on this one. I prefer DeAndre Swift as well. Last question I have before we log off. David, start us off here. Is there anybody besides Zonovan Bam Knight, any running back that you feel comfortable starting on the Jets? I know you and I both like Michael Carter, but can't ignore the usage that Bam is getting.
Well, to our point, though, he did hit that 50% snap usage. I know we had a couple tweets going back and forth with Jacob Sanderson on how Michael Carter is going to be used. But, I think he does see a little more receiving work, but I don't trust any running back right now. I think I saw in the last month or two that Lions rush defense has actually been in the top 10 as far as against running backs in the last month or two. I can't remember the exact time frame, but something like that. They've really stepped it up, so to speak. So I don't trust anyone else at all. But maybe if you're just completely desperate in a PPR league you could maybe think about Michael Carter. But that would be it for, 4 or 5 receptions maybe.
Yeah, and like you said, the rush defense is a lot better than people realize. If I had to force between a flex, I would take Elijah Moore in this matchup over Michael Carter,
for sure.
just because that pass defense has been so susceptible. So, Z, same question to you, and I saw you nodding along. Are you starting Michael Carter, or if James Robinson is suddenly active, or is Zonovan Knight really the only guy worth rostering here?
Knight's the only guy. I mean, yeah, like David, you said, Michael Carter hit a 50% snap share. He had 6 targets and a negative game script against the Bills last week. That's unlikely to happen against the Lions this week. I just don't assume that to happen with the Jets defense being the way it's been lately. So yeah, I mean, Bam Knight, I'm a big fan. I mean, he's legit, and Bam Knight, he's got a lot of upside. He's got breakaway run capabilities. He's a tough runner who can break tackles. He's going to be the goal line runner. I mean, he produced really well last week against the Bills for somebody who had under 50% snap share. So yeah, Bam Knight is all I want from that Jets backfield.
Well, fellas, that's it. I could talk to you guys all day. This was some great high-level football conversation, and hopefully we were able to help the audience out a little bit. Before we sign off, David, one more time, let everyone know where they can find you on social media.
You can find me at DavidZock16 on Twitter, and I'm writing occasionally for Fantasy Pros on the rankings and Dynasty Nerds as well.
Z, let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm at ZKantzFF on Twitter, and I am a contributor to the Dynasty rankings and a Dynasty contributor at Footballguys.com.
And I am Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge, but most importantly, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys so you can check all of the video content coming out from Football Guys, our full-length shows, our short videos, and everything else. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys to check all of the content that we have coming out from Football Guys. Give us a thumbs up below because that's going to help some other people find this video, and leave any comments down below if you have something to add. Give me a follow on Twitter at Dave Kluge, and most importantly, follow Football Guys at Football Guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.